Janet June is going to talk about the Bab.
Yeah.
And we're all ears.
Right. Right. Hello, Marion. Nice to see you joining us as well. Now, here we go to the technical wizardry. I'm pressing my
which you
share
mastered
screen
very quickly.
Oh, I don't know about that. Right. And here we are. Okay, perfect. Good. Right. So this evening, we're going to have the first of a series of talks that's going to take us up to Abdul Baha eventually. But tonight we're going to talk about the life of the Bab. And one of the titles of the Bab is The Herald of the Baha'i Faith. So let's begin with his birth details, if you like, and when he was born. A boy called Ali Muhammad was born in the city of Shiraz in Iran, 20th of October, 1819. And of course, we've just celebrated not long ago the bicentenary of this birth, and many wonderful occasions were held all around the world in celebration. Now, just to sort of give you an idea of what things were like at that time, it was the same year that Queen Victoria was born. So a very different world, if you like, that the Bab was born into. When he was young, his father died, and then it was his uncle, as is the custom in Iran. It's never an occasion where a mother without a male relative, husband or whatever, would be able to raise the children. The children must be raised with a male relative. It's not good enough having just a single parent as a mother. So he ends up being looked after by his uncle, who was a brother to his mother. And as even in infancy, actually, the mother was absolutely amazed at how peaceful and serene he was as a baby. His feeding, if you like, was very regular. He wasn't given to crying or tantrums or anything like that. And she did find this very unusual. But anyway, that was how he developed. And also, as a young boy, he wasn't part of all the rough and tumble that the other boys were involved in and running around and shouting and screaming. He particularly liked to pray, and a lot of his phrases and what he would say and his mannerisms would come over as being very wise for a child of his age. Come the time when they were sent to school, and we should emphasize that by school, it really was just the madrasa. Not to belittle the madrasa in any way, but the only schooling that was formally taught in any way would be that young boys would go to the mullah, the teacher, and they would be instructed in the Quran, and that was it. It was repeating the Arabic phrases from the Quran. It was about memorizing and learning by heart the phrases that you heard, because obviously they didn't read Arabic or speak Arabic. So when they were repeating the phrases of the Quran, many of them did not understand what it was that they were saying. However, one day when the young Bab went to school, his teacher asked him to say a phrase. And the Bab said, well, no, I'm not going to say that unless I really understand what that's all about. So this was quite upset about all this. He said, oh, of course you will. Tell me what it is. Well, I will. Okay, I'll tell you. So he explained what the phrase meant. And the teacher was absolutely astounded. He just expected him to be repeating the phrase back to him word for word. But the Bab took the time to explain what this particular passage from the Quran meant. So the teacher grabbed him and took him back to his uncle and said, look, there's nothing I can teach this boy. He's way ahead of anybody here and myself. You're going to have to be very careful with this young man. So that was his education, and that's all it was. And I think you have to bear that in mind when we come on to what it was that the Báb did and what he wrote and some of the his tablets later, because that was the sum total of his schooling. Just a few years with the mullah at the madrasa, learning the Quran. That was it. So when he gets to about 15, Shiraz is down in the southwest of Iran. And if you go a little further to the west, you'll come to the port city of Bushehr, or Bushir. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. And about 15 years old, he goes to join one of his uncles who has a merchant's business there. And I think apparently a lot of what they traded in was cloth, textiles, etc. And if you ever do get out to see the archive building in Haifa, you'll see some of the clothing that was worn by the Báb. And he was a very natty dresser. And beautiful embroidered coats and clothing that he had. Anyway, so he takes up working in his uncle's business, and he was extremely fair. All the customers loved to do business with him because they knew they wouldn't be cheated. And in many instances, people would leave them products or things to be sold, and they would come back later to get, you know, whatever the profit was or the money for the item was. And in one case, somebody had left them with, I don't know, bales of cloth or whatever it was. And it was some time before the person came back. And when they did come back, instead of, they realized, oh dear, I've waited too long, you know, I've lost out. I could have got a good price for this, but I know I've missed the chance. I'll just take whatever you've got for it now. The Báb said, no, I'll give you the best price that the item would have achieved. It's only fair, and you know. So he was highly regarded amongst all the people of Bushehr. Now, around about this time, all of the major religions are waiting for, they, you know, look through all the details of their chapters and gospels and surahs and everything. And they realize that there's something wonderful that is promised in our scriptures concerning the appearance of a new messenger from God. And of course, in Iran, the Shia Muslims are expecting very much this person to appear, and probably the details are even more determined, you know, in the Quran. So around about that time, several groups were doing a lot of searching and moving around and wondering what on earth, where should we go? How should we learn about this? And two of the shining lights, if you like, in Islam, in Shia Islam, were Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim. And they operated out of Karbala, mainly, which is in modern day Iraq. But Karbala and Najaf are very holy places for the Shia Muslims. And of course, Iran is predominantly the Shia branch of Islam. So Sheikh Ahmad had spoken very clearly about the coming of the promised one, about the one who would arise as a herald to pave the way, if you like, to open the door to the Ancient of Days, the knowledge of the Ancient of Days. So in 1844, a group of students of Sheikh Ahmad and then ultimately Sayyid Kazim, by this time Sayyid Kazim had died, but he'd been very clear to say to his disciples, for want of a better word, you have to go out and you have to search because he's here. And if your heart is pure, you will find him. And one of the preeminent students, if you like, of Sayyid Kazim was a young man called Mullah Hussein. And so he sets out, and we're about to celebrate the declaration of the Bab on the 23rd of May. So around about this time of year, he sets out with his brother and his nephew, and he leaves Karbala, and they set up in Najaf, another holy place, 40 days of prayer and fasting to look for the promised one. So Mullah Hussein eventually arrives, as if drawn by a magnet, it says in the writings. He's trekked and trekked around, and he's taken the boat to Basra. He's gone to, from Basra, he's taken the boat to Bushehr. And then after being in Bushehr, he turns his gaze to Shiraz. And in the early evening, late afternoon, early evening, he arrives outside the city wall, city gate of Shiraz. And there he finds the young man, Ali Muhammad, walking also, and the Bab invites him to his house. And we know the story there that he's invited in. And of course, Mullah Hussein is full of all of the signs that should be there to indicate the veracity, if you like, and the authenticity of this person, this great person that they're looking for. So he's got all of this in his mind, and he's invited by the Bab up to the upper chamber in the Bab's modest house in Shiraz. And there's a picture there, as you can see. Sadly, that house is no longer there. But I do believe that a lot of the artifacts from it, the window frames, door frames, etc., have all been kept safely somewhere. We'll maybe chat about that later. But anyway, in this room, Mullah Hussein puts the questions that he has to the Bab, and the Bab answers him. And of course, they can't believe that this might be the very person that he's looking for. And in particular, he asks him to reveal a certain understanding, if you like, about the Surah of Joseph, very important surah in the Quran. And you'll remember that the story of Joseph is all about the brother who is betrayed by his other brothers and his family and endures terrible trials and tribulations, but manages to surpass all of that, if you like, and eventually triumph in the end. So he reveals these passages to Mullah Hussein, and Mullah Hussein then realizes in whose presence he is. So he's the first to believe in the Bab on that night. And these are just some of the phrases in terms of the station of the Bab that Baha'u'llah uses. And he calls them the essence of essences, the sea of seas, the point round whom the realities of the prophets and messengers revolve, and from whom God hath caused to proceed the knowledge of all that was and shall be. And another phrase that's used about the Bab to describe it is the primal point. And if you can visualize a cycle that meets on a pivot with another cycle, all right? So the cycle from Adam up to the point of the Bab, and the point of the Bab being the pivot from here on in to the cycle of Baha'u'llah, if you like, the Baha'i cycle. That is what he represents. So he's at the end of the prophetic cycle, the Adamic cycle, the prophetic cycle, and he is at the beginning of the cycle of fulfillment. So the primal point. Abdu'l-Baha declares him also to be the morn of truth and harbinger of the most great light. And I think that's a wonderful phrase to bear in mind, the harbinger of the most great light, because it's as though the dawn is breaking again for humanity. And the Bab is this harbinger of that most great light. So it's from that time onwards that he's now known as the Bab, which means the door or the gate, because although he in himself is a messenger of God, his whole purpose is to usher in, or to pave the way, if you like, to herald the appearance of Baha'u'llah. So this is because he said he was the door to the next messenger, who would be the promised one of all religions. And that photograph there is just from the very upper terrace, I think, yes, on Mount Carmel. So he himself is preparing all of his followers, the Bábis, the early young Bábis, for the appearance of Baha'u'llah later. And he was very specific about the timing of it, that it was going to be very soon, and that his whole role and duty, if you like, was to herald the way for Baha'u'llah. And so a great deal of his writing at this time are tributes to Baha'u'llah. And he actually uses the phrase, you see the phrase Baha being used as well. But some of the titles that he, tributes that he pays to Baha'u'llah are "He whom God shall make manifest." And that one is used a lot throughout his writings. "He whom God shall make manifest." The sole object of all previous revelations, including the revelation of the Qaim himself. And he was at pains to point that out, that no matter how wondrous the followers thought that the Bab was, he always discounted that to say, well, no, I'm nothing compared to the one who's to come after me. And other tributes like the Lord of the visible and invisible, the essence of being, the remnant of God, and he around whom the point of the Bayan, the Bab, hath revolved, is come. So it was very clear, really, apart from the actual name of Baha'u'llah, but the phrase Baha was used here and there, but he had to be very careful, because you can imagine the atmosphere of the time in Iran is such that nobody outside of the Islamic clergy could ever make a statement like that. As far as the Islamic clergy were concerned, human beings had no freedom except what they allowed for them to have. In Shia Islam at the beginning of the 19th century, this principalist view prevailed. In other words, ordinary human beings cannot read and understand the Quran. They can't understand Islamic law. And therefore, they do not know what the Islamic way is. The clergy become the embodiment of reason and rationality, and they interpret Islamic law for people to follow and obey. So the understanding was that people are imitators and followers of the clergy. All aspects of your life are decreed upon by the clergy. People have to constantly seek their guidance, and that leads to a kind of enslavement of the Iranian people. So it's in this milieu that the Bab arises and starts sounding like, as far as the mullahs are concerned, wait a minute, this guy's putting himself across as a Muhammad, another Muhammad. We can't be having that. So after his writings are shared around, we've got, and he said that 18 people would independently recognize his station. And he waited for these 18 souls to arise, and they were then sent out to tell lots of other people that the Bab had arrived, he had come, and to share news of the new faith. And here we have a little picture of the Kaaba in Mecca, and the Bab set off on a pilgrimage to Mecca. And well, at that time still there'd be thousands and thousands of people milling around. And he was also going to declare himself to the Sharif of Mecca, but apparently the Sharif wasn't there. So he left a tablet for the Sharif, which it was later discovered. Anyway, while he was there, and I love this wee detail, he held on to the door of the Kaaba and announced that he was the promised messenger, and the people nearby heard him and were amazed. Now, in amongst all of the excitement and euphoria around that time, it's amazing that somebody did remember this, because that is a very important event, that he makes a declaration there. So many people are believing in the Bab by now. They're following him. They know they're known as Bábis, but we've got this ever increasing agitation and hatred, just absolute jealousy and hatred by the rulers and the religious leaders, that they must put an end to this, because this is not right. You know, they're the ones that know what religion's all about, and anybody outside of that is a heretic and must be dealt with most severely. So it's not long before the Bab is huckled, arrested, and he may have had an opportunity to visit the Shah, but the Shah's vizier was determined that this very influential young man was not going to get anywhere near the Shah, because that could end up very badly for all of the ones who had the vested interests in their religious positions and their positions of power. So the chief minister put the Bab in prison, first in one remote castle, which was Maku, way up in the northwest of Iran, and then ultimately even further away up on the Azerbaijani border in Cherik. And these photographs here, I think the one on the right is Cherik, and the one on the left is Maku. And Maku was a castle that was situated underneath an enormous overhang of rock. And it used to be called, sort of loosely, where is the moon? Because you couldn't see, if you were standing underneath the overhanging of rock, you couldn't really see up to the sky. Now, something that characterized the Bab throughout all of his life was his melodious voice. He was just a young man, but he was fair of features, but he had this almost hypnotizing, melodious voice. And when he chanted his prayers and his tablets, even the most hostile of jailers would ultimately become believers, because they were just enchanted by him. Now, as far as the religious leaders were concerned, yes, they thought this was a sort of magical, you know, a very nasty, magical thing for him to do. And they accused him of that all of his life, that he was some kind of magician. He wasn't a messenger of God. So, but that was so, as he's in this castle without light, no candles, freezing cold, he's chanting these verses, and people are hearing him. Now, ultimately, he is arrested, obviously, and he's brought for trial. and he's treated very badly in the town of Tabriz, where ultimately his execution is going to be. And we have the account of the only Westerner who actually met Bab, and it was a Dr. Cormac. I believe he was Irish. It says here a British doctor, but I'm pretty sure he was from Ireland. And he was very curious about this. He thought, my goodness, what on earth is this very gentle young man? What is all this commotion that's being stirred up by what he's saying? And he was interested in the faith that the Bab was speaking of, and was curious about it, and would like to have known more. So although he didn't find out a great deal about it, there were two things that he noticed that were different to the rest of the people of the time. And one was that a lot of the Bab's teachings showed a great deal of respect for Christianity. And the other, very differently to the Islamic understanding, was that women had much more freedom amongst the Bábis. Now that would stand out like a sore thumb in the Islamic community that he was treating. So sadly, in 1845, two of the early Bábis were tortured on the streets of the Shiraz because the authorities wanted to make examples of these Bábis in such a way that nobody would be tempted to become a Bábi. So we have all the ghastly things that happen in public, in Shiraz, dreadful tortures, taking them through the streets, everybody taking their turn to inflict some awful thing on them. And news of this, and this is quite interesting really, because possibly had these atrocities not happened, it might all have just melted away. But we've got an article in the Times newspaper, and they report on these awful goings on. And that looks like it's the month of November, 1845. So even outside of Iran, word is spreading about the Bábi movement and the young Bab. So they continue to tell everyone about his message. And as we see, so many of them were tortured and driven from their homes. However, this did not stop the new faith from spreading. And in the end, the rulers and the clergy decide that the only way out, we've got to stop this. This is getting beyond control now, and we have to take authority here. So they decide to have him executed. And that in itself becomes the most miraculous occasion. Those who witnessed it couldn't quite believe it. And we have Western officials and diplomats, etc., who were there at the time as well and understood what to have happened. So the Bab is in a cell with his companions, and he's dictating some of his final tablets. And the officer comes to say, right, that's it, your time's up, we're taking you out now, you and your pal, and we're going to string you up against the wall, and that's it. And the Bab, I'm paraphrasing here, said, well, no, not until I'm finished what I'm revealing will there be any power on earth that will stop me. Oh, I said, well, okay, never mind. So he rushes him out and lines him up. And it's a Christian, Sam Khan, that's in charge of the regiment of soldiers, 750 of them, who are lining up to shoot him. And Sam Khan is a wee bit nervous about this because there's something about this young man that intrigues him. And I think in order to be on the safe side, he approaches him and said, listen, and again, I'm paraphrasing, if you really are sent from God, if you are this messenger from God, I don't want to have your blood on my hands. I'm a good Christian man. And the Bab reassures them that don't worry, if your sentiment is true, if your heart is pure, that won't be your responsibility. So sure enough, he lines up the regiment, and they fire off the shots. Okay. And everybody, as you can see on the rooftop there in the little drawing, all the people are gathered around the roof of the square. And when the smoke clears from the guns, the Báb had disappeared. Now you can imagine, you know, what is this magician again? What's going on here? Where is he? You know, there's no bits of him on the floor, but the rope with which they tied him up had been frayed. So they look around and around and around. They go back to the room and find the Báb there, finishing off his work. And then he says, now I'm ready. And the second time they take him out, by this time, Sam Khan's had enough. He said, oh my goodness me, I don't want any more to do with this. So he rushes his men out, and an Islamic regiment come in, and they line up. And this time they shoot him, and him and his young associate, his young companion, are absolutely melded by all these bullets into one. However, we're told that their faces were relatively unscathed. But that's it, that's the end of the Báb's life. And so, sorry, I've just, these are just the, I'll just go through this. So the whole episode was witnessed by thousands of people, including the British consul, and of course he reports back with telegrams, etc., you know, on what had happened, and that's why we've got such a detailed account of this. So anyway, even in spite of that, the faith of the Báb continues to expand. Now, obviously the authorities thought, right, we'll just put him in a ditch. The remains are in a ditch, and the jackals and the wild dogs can come and have their way with them. We don't want any bit of this personage left for people to make a martyr of or whatever, you see. But incredibly, two of the close Bábis, they did manage to find his remains in the moat thrown outside of the town. And they gather up his body, and they put it in a casket. And for a long time, nearly 60 years, the remains of the Báb and his companion are kept secretly, sometimes in mosques, sometimes in people's houses, until eventually, I think that the route is out of Iran and eventually goes, I think, to Damascus. And it's from Damascus in Syria that is then brought in, the remains are brought to the Holy Land. And we all know that the shrine of the Báb on Mount Carmel, and that ultimately is where he's placed. Sorry, I should be just going back a wee bit there now. How do I do that? Oh, never mind. Right, so eventually he ends up, and it's Abdu'l-Baha himself who very lovingly, once he has made the initial shrine, not the superstructure that we see with the golden dome now, but the initial structure, yes. And there's a sarcophagus that has been delivered from the friends in Rangoon. And he very tenderly lays the remains of the Báb in that sarcophagus in the middle room of the shrine itself. And that was nearly 60 years later that eventually, so it's so ironic that all of the leaders in Iran, the religious leaders, are so intent on making sure that his message finished, that he was killed, that there was nothing else left of it. And there it is now, with beautiful gardens round about and lit up at night for all the world to see. So this is a wee excerpt from that story of Joseph that was revealed that night, the 23rd of May in 1844. And Ricky, would you like to read this out for us? Thanks.
All praise be to God, who hath, through the power of truth, sent down this book unto his servant, that may serve as a shining light for all mankind. Verily, this is none other than the sovereign truth. It is the path which God had laid out for all that are in heaven and on earth. Let him then who will take for himself the right path unto his Lord. Verily, this is the true faith of God, and sufficient witness of God, and such as are endowed with the knowledge of the book. This is indeed the eternal truth which God, the Ancient of Days, hath revealed unto his omnipotent word. He who hath been raised up from the midst of the burning bush. This is the mystery which hath been hidden from all that are in heaven and on earth. And in this wondrous revelation it hath, in very truth, been set forth in the mother book by the hand of God the Exalted. O concourse of kings and of the sons of kings, lay aside one and all your dominion, which belongeth unto God. Let not thy sovereignty deceive thee, O Shah, for every soul shall taste of death, and this, in very truth, hath been written down as a decree of God.
Now, I just wanted to put this phrase in because remember, this is a young man whose schooling was minimal and whose, there's nothing academic about him. There was nothing, no formal education at all. And yet, revealing these verses, and it's not as though he's got lots of bits of paper and he's rubbed things out and he's gone over that phrase again. These verses and tablets are revealed in one flow that night in the dawn 23rd of May, 1844. So no wonder Mullah Hussein, who was a good bit older than him, he was about 31, the Bab was 25, was absolutely bowled over by this, because this language and this power and this authority that comes across in these commentaries absolutely had him spellbound. So that's just the taste. And there was hundreds of thousands of verses that flowed from the Bab. Now, in the archives in the research department out in Haifa, yes, they have the writings of the Bab, but many, many of the writings of the Bab were lost. So we're thankful that we've got what we have. Oh, sorry. Now that I didn't mean to get onto that slide because that actually finishes my. I was just going to finish here. I'll just stop sharing the screen and finish with a little tribute that Abdul Baha says about the Bab. As for the Bab, may my soul be his sacrifice. At a youthful age, that is to say, when he had reached the 25th year of his blessed life, he stood forth to proclaim his cause. It was universally admitted by the Shia that he had never studied in any school and hadn't acquired knowledge from any teacher. All the people of Shiraz bear witness to this. Nevertheless, he suddenly appeared before the people, endowed with the most complete erudition. Although he was but a merchant, he confounded all the ulama of Persia. The ulama are the doctors of Islamic law. All alone, in a way which is beyond imagination, he upheld the cause among the Persians, who are renowned for their religious fanaticism. This illustrious soul arose with such power that he shook the supports of the religion, of the morals, the conditions, the habits, and the customs of Persia, and instituted new rules, new laws, and a new religion. Though the great personages of the state, nearly all the clergy, and the public men arose to destroy and annihilate him, he alone withstood them and moved the whole of Persia. Many ulama and public men, as well as other people, joyfully sacrificed their lives in his cause and hastened to the plain of martyrdom. The government, the nation, the doctors of divinity, and the great personages desired to extinguish his light, but they could not do so. At last, his moon arose, his star shone forth, his foundations became firmly established, and his dawning place became brilliant. He imparted divine education to an unenlightened multitude and produced marvelous results on the thoughts, morals, customs, and conditions of the Persians. He announced the glad tidings of the manifestation of the Son of Baha to his followers and prepared them to believe. The appearance of such wonderful signs and great results, the effects produced upon the minds of the people and upon the prevailing ideas, the establishment of the foundations of progress, and the organization of the principles of success and prosperity by a young merchant constitute the greatest proof that he was a perfect educator. A just person will never hesitate to believe this. Sorry, right. So that concludes about the Bab. I mean, we've only got so long, friends, and I've missed out so many other wonderful details, but those are the facts of the case, shall we say. And